The Master has this to say about temptation. Temptation signifies the state of intoxication with an evil impulse. Now, an evil impulse simply means an impulse of delusion or outward consciousness. Sin is nothing but the consciousness of unreality, or this dream consciousness in which we live. And so when you are, as he says, intoxicated under the influence of this outward consciousness, then you are in temptation. And as I said in the beginning, temptation is a real force. Temptation is something created by God even. Therefore, that is why Jesus said, lead us not into temptation. Because the delusion is very difficult to supersede. It is very engulfing, very darkening. And that's why Jesus emphasized it so much. And all teachers emphasize, all great saints emphasize the importance of avoiding temptation. I said it is a great force. It is a force because it has been created by God. And we read that right in the Scriptures. Some people think it is nothing. It's just the opposite from God. It is God's consciousness acting in this dream realm. And in Isaiah, the 45th chapter, the 7th verse, we read these words, I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. So do not take the force of temptation lightly. It has been created by God. It says the same thing in the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita. In the 10th discourse, the 36th line, I am the gambling of the cheat. So you see, it is a force. God has created this thing. And yet one aspect of him, his great love, is far above this outward consciousness. And that's why our Master has prayed, Father, make thyself more tempting than temptation. In other words, may thy love sway me more than this outward consciousness. That's the gist of this subject this morning. More tempting than temptation. May we somehow feel the presence of God's love within us. And may that always pull us and be more tempting than this outward consciousness which passes away and which has nothing in store for us but disappointment. That's the meaning of the subject this morning. And understand that worldly temptations or satisfactions enjoyed through the mind and senses give us nothing in the end. We'll be disappointed, while the pleasure derived from the fulfillment of God's laws, wherein we contact him and make ourselves one with him, will give us unending bliss and joy. Which do we want? We all know what we want, but nevertheless, temptation is very tempting. That's why Jesus said, lead us not into temptation. And our Master has said, Father, make thyself more tempting than temptation. Desire is at the root of all things. Desire is our worst enemy because it keeps prodding us. Follow outward things. Follow the glitterings of matter. Follow these worldly longings. Follow all that. And when we follow those things, as you all know, we have nothing in the end because things that are born of this outward consciousness must pass away. There's nothing but disillusionment in those things. And so realize, when you feel a desire pulling you, that's the thing to avoid the fulfillment of that. Except the one desire to know God. And when you feel desire undermining your determination to seek God and God alone, understand that it is simply the pull of outward consciousness of delusion, and that in the end you will have nothing, because just as oil and water cannot mix, so this outward consciousness cannot last. Everything that has had a beginning, the creation of this world and our bodies being born and our consciousness taking form in this body, living in this vehicle, must pass away. Why be tied up with something that's going to run out on us, so to speak? Why not? Why not be tied up with the great love of the infinite, which is inexhaustible and which will never end? Let us understand this subject more tempting than temptation. Because if we once taste God's love, if we once feel God's love, you can never resist it. You will never be satisfied until you make it your own. These are important facts. These are eternal truths. I have one reference at this time about desire, which is taken from Master's little book, Master Said, showing you how we must watch our desires, because silently and subtly they urge us on. Oh, just get this, just get that, and when you get it, it's something else you want. There's no end to it. I don't care what it is. You've all found this to be true. Why not seek God first, get His love, and then whatever He gives us in the way of material things are wonderful. All He asks is that we do not forget Him, that's all. Do not forget the giver while enjoying His gifts. But desire says, no, your fulfillment, your enjoyment will be in these outward things. That's what you want. That's a lie. That's not so. Understand that. And so in this reference from the Master said, desires are the most unrelenting enemies of man. He cannot appease them. The Master said, you cannot appease them. Then he goes on, have only one desire. Have only one desire to know God. Because satisfying the sensory desires cannot satisfy you. Why? Because you are not the senses. We are not the senses at all. We are the soul, a ray of God's great power and His great love. And so he concludes by saying they are only your servants, not yourself. But how they run us, how they operate subtly and silently to take away the freedom of our souls, whereby we should tell the desires what to do and which desires we will follow. Let us not lose the freedom of our soul by following our desires. So, God's love is the most wonderful thing. Those who are once blessed by His touch can never forget it. They will want nothing else. All the saints attest to this thing. And when you really feel just a little bit of God's love, you'll never be satisfied until you are one with that. And when you realize that, then all the devotee's longings of any nature whatsoever disappear. That's why it is so important to follow Jesus' words, seek first God's love, or seek first the kingdom of heaven, and all other things will be added unto you. All other things. I was talking to a devotee the other day, came down from Canada, and he's a very nice young man, but he says, you know, music is the thing. Music is the thing. He was all shaking. He says, when I hear Dvorak, is that his name? He says, I just get all a quiver, he says. And I said, well, wait a minute, I said. That's going to pass away. Your consciousness is going away. Why don't you seek God first? Oh, music, he said. But finally I got him out of it. I said, will you promise me one thing? Yes, I will. He's a good student. I said, will you promise me every day you will not miss your meditation? He says, I will. And I know he'll do that. So I'm leaving all the great ones of music to their fate. I know that in the end he's going to appreciate Dvorak and all the great ones, Beethoven and all those great souls. in a greater way when he finds God. So understand that. All the saints have testified to this thing, that God's love is most enticing, and it's what we want. We're not going to lose anything when we yield to the temptation of God's love. We're going to gain everything. And that's why Jesus said, that peace which passeth all understanding is what we need. Now going on just a little bit. As I have said, we seek fulfillment in outward things, and there can be no fulfillment permanently there. And yet we every day, we're trapped by the pull of the senses because of the bad habit of so long yielding to the pull of outward things. There is no fulfillment there, and the sooner we realize it, the sooner we are going to turn toward that one source wherein we will find all fulfillment, completeness in every aspect. And instead of losing anything as we feel we're going to lose when we give up this thing that ties us to matter and keeps us attached to outward things, we're not going to lose those things at all. We're going to have the presence of God with us, His great love. Having that, we will enjoy everything He gives us in a greater way. That's the important thing. And at this time, I want to read just a little bit from Master's autobiography. And his words are so wonderful and so comforting to the devotee. He says this, outward longings drive us from the Eden within. So the Garden of Eden must be right within us. As a Sunday school teacher said to a little girl in a Sunday school class, who lived in the Garden of Eden? She says, I don't know, but she says, I think the Adamses lived there. So that's what we're going to miss. We're going to be drawn away. Did you catch it all? All right. Now we'll have our reference. Outward longings drive us from Eden within. They offer false pleasures that only impersonate soul happiness. The lost paradise is quickly regained. Listen carefully. I or no one can improve on the Master's words. Sometimes I give a little different angle. Some other minister gives a different angle, but Master's words are supreme if you get the real meaning. And so he says, the lost paradise is quickly regained through divine meditation. Divine meditation means that meditation in which you contact God. Not just sit upright and peruse your thoughts, but wherein you contact Him, as I said this morning, the light, the sound, and His great love. That's divine meditation. And so going on, as God is unanticipatory, ever newness, you cannot exhaust Him. We never tire of Him. Can we be surfeited with bliss, delightfully varied throughout eternity? There's no end of it. You cannot exhaust it. You're the center of the circle of eternity. And what is eternity? God's love. Two great forces in the universe, the great force of repulsion that has created all things, and the great force of attraction which is pulling all things to God. That's the feeling of God. That's eternity, and that is bliss. Is that what you want? Certainly it is. And we can have it because we're made in the image of God. And going on, and this is most beautiful from the autobiography, and it is so true, ever new joy is God. You know, in your moments of meditation, we had a meditation last night with the monks and Encinitas, and the peace and the joy which we felt is God. As Master said, ever new joy is God. He is inexhaustible. As you continue your meditations through the years, He will beguile you with infinite ingenuity. as you continue throughout the years, he will be more and more real. He will beguile you in infinite ways. You cannot exhaust him. That peace which you feel in your meditations is unlimited. And that's the power and the presence of God's love. So different from what you expected you were going to get. I used to say to the Master, when am I ever going to get this? He says, keep at it, it'll come. But he says it'll come in a different way than you think. I think I was expecting some great universe to open up and a great big vision. Here I find this subtle presence of God, which I wouldn't give for all the visions in the world, because it's the presence of God himself. And so he goes on, devotees who have found the way to God never dream of exchanging him for any other happiness. He is seductive beyond thought of competition. These are the words of a great saint, our founder, Paramahansa Yogananda, and I know that you know that they ring of truth, and that God is what we want, and that let our prayer be, Father, make thyself more tempting than temptation. What is it the criminals need? What is it those who have sunk to the depths of despair, what is it they need? They need one thing, and that's God's love, nothing else. That's what they need. They come with all their formulas of making over people and rehabilitation of people. They need one thing, and that is God's love. If they have that, then things will change. The moment they seek that and get a little taste of it, even though they're not conscious of its flow through them, it begins to change them, and they will change for the better. God's love is what we all need, from the worst sinner to any of us. Guru Nanak had these wonderful words to say, showing that even though you have to wait incarnations to get God's love, it's worth it. Even though you have to struggle for incarnations to get it, it's worth it. For Guru Nanak said these wonderful words, "Work one to win good name, praise and approbation of the entire universe." Think of his words now. "Yet if he cometh not under his glance of grace," unless he receives a glance of God's grace, unless he receives God's love, no one shall have a kind word for him. He has nothing unless you receive the glance of God's grace. You have nothing. This is the testimony of one of the great saints, medieval saints, Guru Nanak. And so, also in the Gita, we have the similar statement, which reveals the power of God's love. So don't think you have anything to worry about, because I know you're not what it says in this passage in the Gita. In the fourth discourse, the 36th line, "Even if thou art the most sinful of all sinners, yet shalt thou cross over all sin by the raft of wisdom." Isn't that wonderful? Even if you're the worst of all sinners, still if you turn toward God and his love flows through you, you'll be taken across this sea of delusion on the raft of wisdom, which means by his great love. And another reference in the 9th discourse of the Gita, 30th line, "Even if the most sinful worship me with undivided heart, he too must be accounted righteous, for he hath rightly resolved. Speedily he becometh dutiful." If you just meditate correctly and give God's love a chance to work through you, it changes you. Because it says, "For he hath rightly resolved, speedily he becometh dutiful, and goeth to eternal peace." Know thou for certain that my devotee perisheth never. That's what we need. That's what everybody needs, is the touch of God's love. Let us realize it. Let us wake ourselves up to what we truly need. We need one thing. Whether we're just a simple sinner or the worst of sinners, we need one thing, and that's God's love. And finally, let us not count our failures. When you begin to count your failures, you get discouraged. Don't count your failures, but really realize that in your moments of silence, and those moments can be extended to mean every moment of your existence, realize, instead of remembering your failures, try to realize that there is no separation between you and the one Father. There is no separation, except we think so, except we've followed delusion so long, the habit is there of thinking ourselves separated from Him. But every one of us in our moments of meditation know we are not separated from Him, because we feel His love and His bliss flowing through us. And so, instead of looking back to those failures, let us pray rather, Father, I know there is no separation between us, even though at times it seems so. I know that Thou art mine and I am Thine. Let our prayer be with the Master. Father, make Thyself more tempting than temptation. This should be our prayer. And when after a while His great love and His light flows in upon us, that darkness of delusion in which we thought we were such failures will pass away as if it never existed. When God's light comes, when His love flows through you, the darkness was never there. Just like in a dark room you bring in the light, where is the darkness? And so when God's love comes, when He flows through you, all your deficiencies of ages pass away as if they never existed. These are facts. Those who meditate deeply will understand this. So those of you who have had troubles, who have committed things of which you are not proud, forget them. Only make the contact with God. Then you will see that they never existed. These are wonderful truths. We should not forget them. And let us remember Larry Marsh's great words, striving, striving, striving. One day, the divine goal. That will surely come to every one of us. Striving, striving, striving. One day, the divine goal. We shall see the vision of God's great face, His light. Having that, no darkness ever existed. And that surely will come, without doubt. As it says in the Bhagavad Gita, He who seeth me everywhere, and seeth everything in me, even the evil and temptation, of him will I never lose hold, and he shall never lose hold of me. So in your meditation, make the contact with God. And when you make it, no matter how little it seems, whether just a little glimmer of His light, or whether the cosmic sound coming and then swiftly going, or the surge of His love in your heart, that's the contact with God. Having that, never let go of it. And as the Gita says, he who never loses sight of me, I never lose sight of him. Make thyself, O Father, more tempting than temptation.